This week's episode is brought to you by Ecolab. Looking to lower production costs without compromising quality? Purolite purification resins from Ecolab Life Sciences offer unmatched performance with uniquely uniform beads for consistent results every time. Plus, with dual contingent supply, you get supply chain security you can count on. Discover the power of Purolite resins at puroliteresins.com/ecolab. That's PUROLITERESINS.com/ECOLAB. Welcome back to the Business of Biotech. I'm your host, Ben Comer, Chief Editor at Life Science Leader, and today I'm excited to speak with Jennifer Hawkes Bland, CEO of NewYorkBIO, the New York State Trade Organization, and advocate for life sciences companies, universities, and research institutions in New York State. Jennifer is an attorney who has worked in government affairs at Merck and GlaxoSmithKline, and before she went to law school, she spent some time on the Hill as a legislative assistant to former U.S. Senator Tad Cochran. I'm excited to chat with Jennifer today about what she's hearing from her membership during a time of change in political leadership, to find out more about how state-level organizations like NewYorkBIO support life sciences companies and help them grow, and what her priorities are for the second half of 2025. Thanks so much for being here, Jennifer.
Oh, hey, thanks, Ben. I am thrilled to join you today. And just with that intro alone, I feel like just one or two pieces of that, we can spend the whole time covering it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Well, let's get right back into it. I want to start out with your background experience, as we do here on the Business of Biotech. I mentioned in the intro you went straight out of undergrad into political work. You worked on the Hill as a legislative assistant to Tad Cochran. I'm curious, if you were planning a career in politics at that time.
Yeah, it was interesting. And I think every kid has one of those moments where they're like, this is what I'm going to do, right? Like whether it's be an astronaut or a firefighter or whatever it is, right? And I was one of those nerdy kids who went to Washington, right? Like and toured. And I remember being like walking in the Capitol and thinking, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to work here one day, right? And that was my moment. And so I also was lucky enough in undergrad that I majored in political science. I did not change my major. Well, unlike so many of my colleagues in undergrad, which meant that my last semester was glorious. Tuesday, Thursday classes, like 9 to noon.
Nice.
But I was able to really focus in. Political science was what I wanted to do. I actually interned for Senator Cochran in his Jackson, Mississippi office after my junior year, so between junior and senior year. It also happened to be, and Senator Cochran he's passed away, but he was a Republican, and there also happened to be the Republican convention happening that summer. And I also figured out that Senator Cochran needed me as an intern to assist at the convention, which was an amazing way that I got to
Wow.
also partake in something really kind of exciting and fun, a piece of that truly political theater, right? And it only sort of sealed the deal that I wanted to go to Washington after college, and I did that for several years.
Yeah, for 6 years, is that right?
Yep. And three of those, actually, I worked in Senator Cochran's Mississippi office while I was in law school. So I affectionately refer to it as the Thad Cochran Law School Scholarship for Jennifer Hawkes at the time, because I would go clerk at firms in the summer and then come back and have my job back during the school year.
Oh, excellent. Well, what made you decide to get a law degree? I mean, at that point, were you still on a path to go into politics, or had you already decided that, maybe it wasn't for you?
Yeah, so I love the politics part. I also love the policy part and the advocacy, right? So just petitioning the government, like those sorts of things. And I realized that that skill set could really also be honed, right? With law school, it also taught me to be a better critical thinker. It 100% taught me to be a better writer. It took all the flowery writing that a political science undergrad major may have used and just redlined that down to be more effective and more concise. But it was interesting. So my path sort of to the pharma, biotech world started when I was placed in my law firm, and I was randomly assigned to the Pharmaceutical Products Defense Litigation sort of practice group. Right. As a first year associate, many times you're, sort of assigned. You have certain aptitudes or whatever. And I knew I wanted to try litigation. Hence, right, that's that theme of advocacy, right, running through. And maybe I would have been in construction law and we wouldn't have been having this conversation today, but I wasn't. And so our company is, our clients at the firm were, in this case, we were working with pharmaceutical companies, right, therapeutics companies, and defending them against claims from plaintiffs alleging, right, that their therapeutics had injured the plaintiffs in the course of their therapeutic treatment.
Right. And so then you moved over to in-house and worked in government affairs, regulatory kind of roles, first at GSK and then at Merck. I guess, how would you describe that experience of working at, large pharmaceutical companies, GSK and Merck? And I'm curious, what you might say about, some of the biggest policy or regulatory issues that you had to contend with during that time.
Yeah. So, like any good story, it's circuitous, right? Rarely is anything interesting and totally linear. And as I talked to a lot of college students, these days, and grad students these days, and I tell them to, be wary of what they think is going to be this very straight linear path, because that A is not usually not the way it happens, but B, if it happens that way, you might be missing out on some other opportunities, right? So, there's my piece of career advice for the students. But what happened is I practiced law, then moved back to Washington, D.C. So second tour, right, in D.C. and worked at the Consumer Healthcare Products Association, which is the national trade association representing over-the-counter medicine makers, of which GSK, Schering-Plough, which later became Merck, right, were members of that trade association. So I was recruited to go in-house at GlaxoSmithKline because they saw my work and I worked with them at the trade association. And so it was interesting for me when I traded in, right? I traded in my jury that I was, advocating in front of on behalf of my clients to members of Congress, members of the state legislature, members of an executive branch, right, in the state, to talk about the importance of policy issues to, at that point, right, my company, right, because I was representing an individual company. So it really wasn't different in a skill set. It was advocacy. My audience was just different.
Yeah. Well, are there any issues that particularly stick out in your memory as either challenging or just interesting to work on that you had to go out and explain to legislative bodies? I mean, some of these, these issues are very complicated. They're not understood well by the general public, including many members of Congress. What stuck out, from your time of having to kind of educate and advocate for Merck and GSK?
Yeah, I mean, how long do we have, Ben? The list is lengthy, but I'll tell you a couple of scenarios. One is, and this is one of my favorite stories. So I am originally from Mississippi. For those of you who might have known Thad Cochran, you would know that he is a Mississippi senator that we talked about earlier. And I was working on patent reform, right, for GSK, along with colleagues, and we were trying to create a Dear Colleague letter, which meant a letter, right, for some members of Congress to the rest of Congress. They were writing their colleagues to talk about the importance of an issue. In this case, it was patent reform. And we needed to craft a letter that had patent holding signatories from every state represented, right? So you had all the states represented. And obviously there are some states where there aren't pharma companies that exist there that would have had, those types of patents. And however, in Mississippi, one thing that is very important in the state is agriculture. And through my work, I did ag work when I worked for Senator Cochran first. And you can take, you can take the girl out of the farm, but you can't, right? And so I knew someone that developed seeds. And so, right, like to plant in the ground and new strains and they held patents that way. So to take it back, I was like, you never underestimate the work you do along the way and the impact that it can have later in your career, right? And so that was a good example of something that you would have never thought would have ever sort of rolled back around. And yet, pharma companies and seed companies value the IP creates a lot of the value for that
Absolutely.
therapeutic for that seed in this case. And so we were able to sort of combine forces and really work together across industries to have an impact ultimately on patients.
And this was, I'm thinking this was probably after Ted Kennedy led the effort to get the 12 years of exclusivity for biologics. That had already been passed at that time, probably.
Yes,
Not
yes,
that that has to
exactly.
do with seeds, but I'm just trying to put it into the timeline here.
Exactly, right. Yes. And then another really kind of interesting um thing we worked on at the federal level was it's called track and trace, right? Colloquially, right? So
Hmm.
serialization, right, of therapeutics as they work their way through the right through the supply chain. And what we found ourselves in a position where you had a number of states, California, right, sort of on the leading edge of this, that were enacting differing requirements for tracking and tracing lots of therapeutics as they went through, right, the distribution process. And so we really needed to craft federal legislation. And some in your audience might be surprised, some will not be surprised, that it is an incredibly large lift to start from scratch and ask Congress to pass something novel and new that doesn't exist to create a framework. And so that took a number of years and it took an incredible cross section of industry, the supply chain, right? Like all of the companies that work in a supply chain to get a therapeutic from where the pharma company produces it to where it is fulfilled in your local pharmacy, right? And so that was something that was incredibly rewarding. It took a long time, but just working together across sort of so many different entities really shows you the power that our industry can have when everyone is sort of rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be pretty satisfying to start out from, an educational standpoint of like, what even is this issue all the
Yeah.
way through to getting, a new policy, enacted. I'm sure that's a satisfying job to be in.
And some days it's more
Doesn't
satisfying
always work
than
out
others.
that way. Right. Let's talk about New York Bio. You have large pharma corporate members, and so let me before I go into my little spiel about what New York Bio is, which I should probably have you do. I did have a question. I was just sort of flipping through the membership files, and I noticed some company names that I would kind of considered to be California companies, and they're like Amgen or Genentech that are members of New York Bio. Your membership also includes, of course, startups, smaller companies, universities, and researchers. But I guess is it sort of open to all comers, or if you have an affiliate in New York, is that how it works?
No, so it's really open to all comers, right? If your company is interested and in it's either an R&D company, it may be a patient advocacy organization, right? It could be an academic medical institution. And if you either have a presence in New York or you're interested in work that's going on in New York, whether and one thing that we see with a lot of very early stage companies, especially post COVID, is they will have employees, even small companies, maybe that have 10 or 20, right, people that work there, they'll be scattered, right? Because a lot of what they
Yeah.
do, they can do virtually, right? Obviously, lab work is different. And so maybe someone is in New York, maybe someone's in Ohio, maybe someone's in Michigan or California. And so if it makes sense for those companies to join a trade association in their different places, right? Because of the networking and the opportunities that that provides. So we have a mix, and you're right. I think one of our member companies, which is a biotech company based in California, New York Bio was the first non-California trade association, right? That they
Hmm.
joined because they were interested in the advocacy work that we do in Albany with the state legislature and the governor's office, right? That was a really important piece for them because part of access for patients depends on, Medicaid coverage and other policy choices that the state government makes as far as access for patients. So there's a lot of intersection, no matter where you're based. If you have patients in New York, then it can be impactful. And my apologies because I am sitting in New York City right now, and it sounds like the fire trucks are right behind me.
Hey, that's part of the city. That's no problem. No worries. I'm not even hearing it on my end. I was just thinking about, companies that might be partner or collaborating with the university or have partners that are in New York, not to mention even remote employees that live there. So that makes sense. I want to ask next about smaller and earlier stage organizations that you're working with. And my question is how, and I guess I'm putting myself in the shoes of, I'm giving myself a promotion. I'm putting myself in the shoes of a CEO at a startup or
Yeah.
some other member of the leadership team in early stage biotech. There's a huge focus on asset development, progressing a candidate, getting to the next milestone or catalyst, getting the data in, making sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. I imagine that government policy advocacy may end up falling kind of down the list, at least at first, until there's an issue, that's directly affecting your company. But how do what would you say to smaller, either startups or early stage organizations about how they should start thinking about government affairs and advocacy and how they can make their voices heard?
Yeah, and I will say even a step back further than that, right? They're worried about the valley of death, their run rate, right? All of the things,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
With starting up a new company, not to mention one that, has a 9 in 10 chance of not surviving or getting a therapeutic to the market. They don't even know, right? They don't know that they need to even worry about it. And so if they happen on New York Bio through whether it's through our network here, which is usually right, so it's the convenings that we do in New York across the state, or whether it's our LinkedIn presence or whatever, they realize they're like, oh, okay, this organization is here. So one thing we talk to potential new members about is the advocacy piece, because at the end of the day, they are less likely to get funded to do what they want to do, right? Which is to bring a therapeutic, a device, a digital opportunity, right, to patients if there is not a regulatory pathway to approval and reimbursement. And those are almost always policy choices. There are policy choices in the public sector, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, right? Or they are policy choices right in the private sector through private insurance and coverage. But there's often a lot of overlap, right, in those things, in the way therapeutics are treated. And so we talk to them about what we're doing on their behalf and on all of our members' behalf, right? And we have a government affairs committee of our members. And it is primarily staffed by companies with government affairs professionals, but we do have some of our members that join that are interested, and so maybe they're personally interested. And then I'll take member companies to Washington, right, a couple of times a year at least. It seems to be more important and top of mind these days to talk about Washington. But having the ability for someone, a founder particularly, right, who is building a business, it happens to be a biotech or a therapeutics company or a digital device company, but having them talk about hiring people, building a business, growing the payroll in New York is really impactful. And I talk to them about telling their story to policymakers because that ultimately moves the needle.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean that makes a lot of sense, and I'm just thinking too about the amount of news churn that's happening right now, and sometimes even for me, who's someone who reads the news every day, I can't always make heads or tails of what is being proposed versus what's been enacted. Do you get questions, from your early stage members who may not, have a government affairs position at the company, just saying, hey, like, I don't know what to make of this. Can you explain this to me, or help me make my voice heard if it's an issue that I need to speak on? I mean, do you have a lot of calls like that?
We do. We have some calls like that. And then we provide it's sort of like a monthly member only briefing, right? Which covers a lot more of the advocacy work we do. And that'll go out to all of our member companies. And so that's helpful, right? Because it sort of lays out sort of what we've been working on. If the legislature, the New York legislature is in session, like sort of what we've been working on in Albany, and then obviously what we're working on at the federal level. And so that's helpful, but that does lead to some good conversations, right? And then we're always looking for people who want to express, right, their concerns, their support, right? Because it's not only concerns. Although my favorite thing, and for those of you who have known me a while, I've said this over and over again. Usually, when we're dealing with a sort of a thorny or complex policy issue, our side, the pharma biotech, side, has a white paper, and the opponents usually have a bumper sticker. And
Right.
so, and look, I mean, I'm a lawyer by training. You think I would be succinct. Our scientists write white papers. They do
Yeah.
research, right? They think really big picture things, and they really are looking for ways to sort of move the needle, right, for humankind, right, and for the health of the world. And it doesn't lend itself to a bumper sticker type advocacy. So part of the job of a trade association is to try and take those really sort of deep thoughts and those learnings and help translate that into layman's terms, if you will, right?
Mhm.
So policymakers can understand the real impact on patients, on economic development, right, on health as a whole. So that's one of the roles that trade associations, and in this case, New York Bio in particular, can play.
Right. That's one of the roles. What would you say are, I guess, your primary objectives or mission at New York Bio? Is it advocacy in terms of policy, and advocating for the policy that your members want? Is that number one, or how would you, I guess, characterize the overall mission?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it really depends on where you sit. So, if you are a therapeutics company or a patient advocacy group, then we're going to really probably work really closely right on the advocacy issues. We do a patient engagement summit every year, right? So we bring in hundreds of patient engagement, patient research foundations, along matching them with pharma biotech executives, and have conversations about the work we can do together. We also then do a lot of convening. So if you're an early stage founder CEO, and it's important that you network with other similarly situated, right, founders, you want to find your community. And part of your community is wherever you sit, whether we're hosting something in New York City or on Long Island or in Rochester or Buffalo or Albany, right? We do all of those things. It's about creating opportunities for our members in a whole bunch of ways. So the convening is one, right? So networking, education. We do a lot of our networking events also include, let's say, panel discussions or fireside chats, topics that are really hot and, and top of mind. Now, you were talking about reading the news every day, right? It's whether it's in, different national publications or trade publications, right? It's a really important way we gather that. Yeah, so it depends on where you sit. Our goal is to provide the most value across the broadest group of our members at any given time.
Are you also, to your point about convening, are you also sourcing things for people like, I wonder if you're getting members who might say, I really need to find, a small manufacturer for, my IND submission, or I really am looking for, a CEO who has successfully, received approval and commercialized a couple of
Yeah.
products to advise us. I mean, are you able to kind of create those linkages between member works?
Yeah, we do a lot of matchmaking, right? For
Yeah.
lack of a better term, among our members, among our sponsors, right, and the programs we do. Um, we also host. I've really leaned in, right, to sort of New York as a finance hub, and so New York Bio. I mean, no one else offers, right, the access, the exposure to the financial, certainly to the financial markets, but really to the financial infrastructure, I would argue, of the world, right?
Yeah.
Than you have in New York. And so New York Bio has a whole series of finance focused events throughout the year. In 2 weeks, why we chose the week after bio in Boston, I'm not sure, but in a couple of weeks, we will host the New York Bio Finance Summit. And so that's going to be a good opportunity to really have some deep conversations. The audience is going to be investors, early stage companies, early stage CEOs, so they can make those connections as well as learn from some experts in the field right now about topics that are, that are very top of mind for everybody.
Yeah, and your point on funding is well taken. A critical aspect, particularly of a startup or early stage biotech. Building that runway to progressing your product. And I suspect that you might be a little biased on the answer to this question, but I'm wondering what you would say about, do you think that being based in New York, for all the reasons that you just gave, gives you an edge in terms of receiving funding, or are you so connected kind of nationally that other companies, if they have a great compelling science and an interesting offering that that you can help out others as well? Or I mean, would you, I guess the root of my question, Jennifer, is if you're about to found a biotech and you're looking around at places to land, do you go to New York State because you feel like you might have a better opportunity for getting some investment versus other states?
Well, Ben, that seems like a layup. Here's what I think. I think the old adage is true. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, right? So I think New York is an epicenter. But what I really think is investment will follow good science, right? And good science exists across the US. So it would be foolhardy of me to say that, yes, you need to be here. You don't. Look, we have so many great things to offer in New York. Of course, I think companies should start here and grow here. However, we work with companies really across the US and across the globe, right? When you think about New York also, another thing that we haven't even touched on is, right, we have the UN here. We have, countries have their offices, certainly for the UN, but many have consular offices, right, which is their economic offices, right, abroad. And so we work with a lot of foreign entities as they think about bringing their life science companies to find investment in the US. And likewise, when we think about, okay, opening up other markets outside the US for therapeutics companies, what are the countries that we're going to go to? What relationships can we build and do we have? And that helps our member companies, right, when they're looking to expand ex-US in different markets.
Yeah, well, I completely buy into the idea of if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. It's what I told myself when I moved to New York City with
Yes.
no prospects right out of school, trying to become a writer. So that makes sense for me. I wanted to ask, New York is in the midst of a mayoral election right now. But that aside, by the time this episode comes out, I think the election will probably have been announced. So I won't ask you to make any
Please
any.
don't.
Yeah, I won't ask you about who's going to win or who you want to work with. But I am curious about how important the office of the governor or the mayor of a city like New York is in terms of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, look, anytime, like when you're building an ecosystem, really of anything, right? But in this case, we're talking about life sciences. It takes a many year investment in public private dollars, right? I mean, you have to have everyone, sort of in the boat, rowing in the same direction, right, to be successful. And in this case, we've seen the governor's office, and certainly right now, Governor Hochul announced last fall the New York Biogenesis Park, right? That's going to be out on Long Island. I think that's like about a $430 million investment in a cell and gene therapy hub. That follows on the heels of an announcement at Roswell Park, right, in Buffalo, that's also going to be a cell and gene, that was the first cell and gene therapy hub. And then the one in Nassau County, right, is going to be coming out online in the next several years. So you have the state making significant investments. You have New York City. In this case, we are blessed in New York that we have a very robust state economic development agency and a city economic development agency, right? And they work hand in hand to recruit, attract, maintain businesses, right, in New York. And life sciences has been a really key, important part of that. And New York City Economic Development Agency has been a really key part of developing the New York City economic development of life sciences. And that's been in real estate, that's been in direct investment. NewYorkBIO is working right now on building a resource hub. It's giving you a sneak peek of something that is still in somewhat stealth mode. So we're going to be coming out with a resource hub for people for all over the world. It'll be website based, but it'll be gathering information that everyone needs on our life sciences community all in one spot. So stay tuned. There'll be more to come on that.
Oh, interesting. Will that include things like, the cost of lab space and availability of different kinds of, manufacturing capability, that sort of thing?
It'll have facilities, it'll have programs, it'll have funding, it'll have events, it'll have jobs. Yeah. So news reports, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's going to be a comprehensive resource hub that aims to connect the communities and the individuals with both, right, like what people are looking for when they're coming into New York. And then for those people who are here and doing business in sort of the biotech scene, what will enhance their ability to do it faster, do it better, right, and network better so that they can bring their cures and treatments to patients even faster and more efficiently.
Yeah. On New York City, there's a lot to recommend it. I mean, I know from living there for almost 10 years that it's a very tight-knit ecosystem for biopharma. You have obviously large companies based in the city, as well as really interesting new and innovative biotechs. But my question is it affordable right now? If you're, let's say a scientist-led biotech startup, you have some intellectual properties really interesting, you want to turn it into a product. Is it feasible, to open up an office with some employees and do your work in the city? And if it isn't, what are some of your other favorite? I mean, I know I'm going on here, but Regeneron, for example, has been
Yeah.
an extremely successful company based in Tarrytown, just a short ride, on the train from New York City. But do you have a sense of, I guess, the affordability question for the example that I gave on a biotech startup that maybe wants to be in the city, but is concerned about the financial aspect?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my answer 6 years ago would have been very different, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
So we have a fantastic array of early stage space, right? We have a number of incubators. We have accelerator programs, right, that may be virtual or somewhat in person and virtual. And then we have a lot of space here and incubator spaces for early stage companies. And those are in shared, they either have shared lab space or as, space where you can rent a bench and then you have an office, right? So we have all different iterations. And the beautiful thing about New York, and when people ask me about other, New York compared to insert name of other biotech, hub, I say that we also it's different, right? New York always does its own thing. And in biotech and how we're growing is no different. And so you may be let's say you're spinning your discovery out of Columbia, right? So you're up in the northwest part of Manhattan, or you're in Harlem, and there are incubators there, right? And there's Harlem Biospace, there are some new buildings that have come online. And then if you are on the west side, right near the Stem Cell Foundation, like there is space that has been built out there. If you are on the east side, right, in the academic centers near, right near Rockefeller University. Rockefeller has a new incubator that's on campus, the Ford Incubator Center. And then, of course, Alexandria really led the way when they built, they have two towers, right? And they have startup space, as well as build out space, then full space, for larger companies, down to where New York Bio is located at Biolabs at NYU Langone, which is, we are down in Soho. I like to say Soho, but really it's Hudson Square. And so we're right south of Houston. And so it really is all, and then Long Island City has Inno Labs and Hatch. And so it really is across the city if you're just talking about New York City. So it provides opportunities for proximity to academic centers, particularly if your founder is still has one foot in academia, right? Which is often the case, right? When they're spinning out and founding. And then you have access to sort of the ease of, public transportation. And then you talk about Regeneron in Westchester. Westchester has a lot of opportunities and they have space, that is coming online. And so I think that those are great. I live in Westchester, right? So I take the train in the morning and it's an easy commute. I reverse commute is easy too. So I think we have a lot of availability and opportunities for individuals that want to found and grow companies here. So I think 6 years ago, I would have said, oh, we're getting there. These projects are supposed to come online. And then you have other investment firms like Deerfield, who has built out space that includes the Deerfield offices, but also the Cure, which they have an incubator space and they have an event space. And New York Bio will be holding our Innovation Summit on September 30th at the Cure, right? They're one of our members and partners, Deerfield is. And so it's really fun and interesting to go all across the city. I mean, the state as well, but you would ask about the city, to see the different areas that are growing and how they're growing and how New York Bio member companies and New York Bio activities fit into all of those different spaces.
What about other parts of the state that are exciting or interesting to you? There are clearly, excellent universities in places like Buffalo and Rochester. There's activity in Albany, but are there other? And maybe I just named them, but what are the places that you're excited about or that strike you as growing into an impressive biotech ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. It really is interesting. And, in large part, and this is not, New York is not dissimilar, right, from other states when we talk about this early stage ecosystem of any insert, type of industry growing up out of academia, right? That's often, right, you have those, students, PhD students in our case, right, are often interested in being entrepreneurial and, right, and sort of building a business. And so we see it from Stony Brook, right, out on Long Island. Think about Northwell Health, right, which is the largest employer in New York, right? And that is, also on Long Island is where they're headquartered. That's where the Biogenesis Park is going to go, sort of right next door, right, to the Northwell facilities. Yeah. And then you mentioned Rochester, Buffalo, Albany. Certainly the Capital Region has some really interesting opportunities there. Regeneron at Rensselaer has a pretty large facility in the Capital Region right across the river from Albany, and as well as Taconic, another of our member companies. And so you see the work they're doing there. The Albany College of Sciences, they've built out some training space, right, for students that want to work in biotech pharma, but may not want to do the whole PhD route, right? So we need all levels, right, of the workforce. And so they've been doing some really good work there. And then when you look at academic institutions that are world-class in Rochester and in Buffalo, and their early stage companies that they're doing, Empire Discovery Institute is based in Rochester, but it's a combination, it's a partnership between the University of Rochester, the University at Buffalo, and Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center, right, also in Buffalo. And so they're looking at discoveries that are coming out of those three institutions. And Ron Newbold runs that and does a fantastic job of really identifying, right, potential wins for those three institutions as they collaborate. And then we are doing, one thing that New York Bio does, we've talked about a lot of the different things, One of the things we do is we have a fellows program for early stage companies, very specifically early stage companies, raised less than 7.5 million to be eligible to participate. And one of the programmatic pieces we do, we provide opportunities for them to pitch, receive feedback on their pitches. And we do it in different locations across the state. July 15th, we will be in Rochester for a pitch day. And they'll have a series of judges that will look at the pitches, give them feedback. But even before that, we pair them with mentors, and they work on their pitches with professionals in a non-judgmental setting, right, to help them be better, refine the pitch, talk about who the audience is and what they want to get out of it before they pitch in front of a broader audience. And those really, there's not a ton of prize money attached to it, right? It's other opportunities to go to have access to things. But it's been really good, right, for our companies.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like an excellent program. And you mentioned that Deerfield is a member company. Do you have other banks or investment groups that are part of your membership, and are people actually pitching to those groups, or are they, how are they involved in your membership?
Yeah, we do. We have we work closely with a number of investors. Aisling is another one of our members, and I have actually a board member from Aisling and a board member from Deerfield, right, that sit on the New York Bio board. I'm grateful to have a very good cross section. I have 30 board members on the New York Bio board, and so my goal as we look at the board sort of composition is to really create, right, a board that is reflective of the ecosystem, and so it has ones for everybody. But we also work closely with a number of investors sort of throughout the year. And the goal of the mini pitch days is less about them, closing a deal, right, at that particular pitch, and more about the ability to improve their pitch and then build relationships. So we will have investors that come particularly for their networking reception part. They're not there to so much judge the pitch, but they do get exposure, and then they get the chance to meet and talk to the founders, right, in a networking setting, which has proven right, beneficial for everybody.
Yeah,
Really.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm thinking about your membership. What would you say are, I guess, some of the biggest needs that they have right now? And I guess I'm wondering if they're the same kind of macroeconomic funding issue needs, that the entire industry is up against right now, or if there are other things that are maybe unique to your member groups in New York.
Look, I would love to sit here and tell you that there was some weird niche thing that only New York Bio could fill. But the reality is, if you were talking about financial conditions, right, by and large, they are driven by the science, how fast you're advancing the science, what is your next inflection point, right? And that is only done when you have funding to do the experiments and to go through your process. And I will tell you that by and large, macroeconomic conditions in the industry are impacting everybody, right? And you see that with, right, the public markets, you see that with valuations, right, that for private companies, and whether they're raising money, and they're not raising money necessarily at the same valuation that they were, right, in 2020 or 2020. Yeah. So that you can't discount sort of the macroeconomic conditions. With that said, I think what New York Bio has done, and what our member companies that are successful have done, is really focus on what they can control, where they can get to next. You have to tune out, right, some of the noise, whether it's the noise from Washington, whether it's noise from the markets, right, whatever that is, and focus on what you can control, where you can get to next, to make advances along your path.
Right. Right. There's been a big push at the national level to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. I think that's a large part of the strategy with tariffs. And I'm wondering if you have sensed or noticed new manufacturing, coming into the state, or people asking questions about that, whether, it's companies wanting to build their own manufacturing, or CDMOs, wanting to build a new factory in the state. Are you seeing that happen at all?
Yeah, we definitely are. We're seeing, and I'm certainly seeing Empire State Development, right, which is the state economic development agency, also, right, being super laser focused on if a company has made an announcement, right, that they are going to, if it's a domestic company, they're going to onshore, or if it's a international company that says they're going to invest in manufacturing capabilities, like they, as do I, would like for them to locate here, of course. And look, it's a business decision, and the best case we make is just talking about all of the things, right, that New York has to offer. And for us, for New York Bio, it's how we can help connect the dots, right? For if you put a facility here and if you build a facility in New York State, then we will have a role in helping you fold into the community, make sure you're right, having the right people. We can help with making those connections, right? Making it more seamless for your company as you build out a business here. Look, I mean, it's we had to really look at the supply chain after COVID. I think we saw the vulnerabilities, right, with the supply chain. I also think that, the pharmaceutical market, both for finished therapeutics, active pharmaceutical ingredients, right, it is a global supply chain.
Absolutely.
And it has grown it has taken decades to make it into a global supply chain. And so, as they say, some of those decisions are way above my pay grade. But I think companies are trying to be thoughtful and understand at the end of the day, where can we address vulnerabilities, right, in the supply chain while maintaining their ability to reach patients worldwide still, right? We
Right.
can't discount the need to make sure patients are taken care of wherever they exist in the globe.
Are you hearing, and maybe just anecdotally, or maybe not, but are you hearing about any impacts to your members in response to or because of changes at the NIH in terms of funding cuts? I'm just curious, if any of that is kind of making it back to you at this point.
Yeah, yes. I mean, anecdotally, yes, we have heard concerns about whether NIH grants are being paid in a timely manner, right? I do think, and I've heard recently, is that as things settle out a little bit, meaning there's not quite so much flux, right, in news coming out of NIH or FDA, right? Like, I think as things hit more steady state, companies are able to navigate a little better. You had a lot of personnel turnover, and maybe turmoil is the right word, right? Sort of earlier in the year. And I think as that quiets down through various channels, then we're seeing companies being able to get back, right, a little bit more to a steady state. And NIH, New York Bio, and several of our colleague trade associations across the country. New York Bio convened on everyone's behalf a webinar recently on NIH funding opportunities. There is a funding opportunity. I think the deadline is actually June 10th, so it will have passed by the time this comes out. But my point in bringing that up is there are opportunities for funding through NIH, through their grant programs. It's not like everything just shut down, right? And
Yeah.
trade associations can help companies find the path to get right. So find the right person to talk to, find a program officer to have that conversation with, to try and figure out if it's SBIR funding or STTR, right, for the academic standpoint. Like, what is that? How can I find the right avenue to not only figure out if there's funding, but to then ask the right questions? And so that's part of our job, is to make sure you can be connected.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned the other kind of state level organizations like yours. I was curious about how you work with them, and if it's kind of a formalized thing or if it's sort of ad hoc based on, whatever a need is. I mean, I don't think every state has a trade organization specifically focused on biopharma. Obviously, a number of them do. Some are, bigger than others, smaller than others, but how would you describe that relationship between New York Bio and other state level organizations?
Yeah, so New York Bio in particular has a great relationship. And you ask whether it was ad hoc or formal, it is both.
Okay.
So yeah, no, it's a good question. It's totally valid. So there is the Council of State Biotech Associations,
Oh,
CSBA, right? And it is a federation of the different state biotech associations, of which I think that there are 49 state biotech. Some states have
Oh, okay.
multiples, right?
All
So
right.
California, right, has multiple associations. Texas has several associations. And so what we do is, and then there is a board of directors for the Council of State Biotech Associations. I sit on that board of directors. And so I get to work in that formalized setting with my colleagues from across the country. And then I work in an ad hoc, I work very closely with all of my colleagues in the region, right? From Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, right? And the list goes on, Delaware, the list goes on. Really, the entire region really works closely together. And we look for ways to support each other and our member companies, which is fantastic because, often we have, there may be New Yorkers that work in Connecticut or Boston. And certainly
Sure.
there are people that live in New York and work in New Jersey and vice versa, right? So we're always looking for ways to be supportive and collaborate. And we do a pretty good job, I think, of finding ways to collaborate, certainly at the advocacy level.
Yeah. What are your top priorities, Jennifer, for I guess the second half of 2025 at New York Bio? And anything else that's kind of a top of mind or top priority for you, forward looking, thinking about, what's coming in the next year.
Yeah, Ben, very good question. I like the forward leaning question. Look, I think for me, for New York Bio, it is about making sure our members understand we are staying the course, advocating on their behalf. We tune out the noise when it's noise. We pay attention when it's going to be substantive, and we engage, whether it is at the federal level on policy, whether it is funding mechanisms, right, that Congress is considering or the administration is considering, whether it's actual policies that impact patient access in Albany, right, or the governor is considering whether to veto or sign legislation. New York Bio will be there and be engaged. If it is creating opportunities for networking and connection building and ecosystem enhancement, New York Bio is there. We are the convener. We are the assistant. We are supporting others that are convening groups, right, across the state. And so for me, it's exciting to see everything that we have coming up in the second half of the year. For those listeners who are in the region, who are interested in New York Bio, our website is easy to find. Check it out. You can see all of those things where you too individually can engage. And look, my goal is to enhance the ecosystem. And at the end of the day, my ultimate goal is to make sure more patients have better access to therapeutics that are created here in the US. And whatever little part I can do and New York Bio does for that is going to be a win.
Are there any specific policies, either at the state level or federal level, that you're particularly focused on right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're always interested in funding levels, right, for
Yeah.
our early stage research grants, whether that's, the SBIR program, right, the Small Business Innovation Research Grant Program at the federal level is up for reauthorization this year. And so that's important. So you have two things there, right? You have appropriations, so you have the money that is spent, and then you have the authorizing legislation, meaning the program's existence. You have to have both. You have to have a
Right.
program that is put into existence and then reauthorized every time it expires. And then you have to have the funds that are appropriated and therefore then dispersed to those companies. So, we're going to be working on that at the federal level. And then at the state level, New York State is a quasi part-time legislature, right? They will finish the majority of the work on their legislative session in mid-June. And then we suspect this year that they may be back, depending on what happens with funding at the federal level. New York may have to come back for a special session in the fall to adjust their budget because they make certain assumptions about how much federal funding will flow to the state. And if those assumptions prove to be incorrect because things are changing at a rapid pace, then they'll come back. And so, yeah, so we work on everything from whether it is, 340B drug pricing to prescription drug importation, patent settlement legislation. So very, very specific types of policy issues to the bigger pieces of funding for centers of excellence and centers for advanced technology and funding for things like we talked about earlier, right? With the biogenesis park and the cell and gene therapy hubs. We really engage on a broad cross-section of issues that bubble up both at the state and the federal, and sometimes both.
Yeah, and is agriculture included too in your organization?
Yeah, so we don't in New York in particular. We don't have as many. My colleague CEOs in the Midwest in particular have a lot more of the ag and environment.
Okay. Yeah.
Companies. I have a soft spot, right? Because I grew up on a farm, and then I also grew up early in my career doing ag policy, right? Like I mentioned earlier, and so yes, and so I also think that when you're looking, if you think about biotechnology also through a biosecurity lens, you have to think about One Health. You have to think about how animal health, human health, right, plant health really are going to all work together. And I think it's a national security issue that we really need to pay attention to how the choices that we make at the policy level, whether it's ag, environment, human health, they really all do need to be made with an idea of thinking about ultimately how they all work together to both protect our national security, but also how this sort of One Health umbrella makes a difference.
Great. Excellent. Well, Jennifer, we have come to our time pretty quickly here. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh my gosh, Ben, I had a great time. Thank you so much. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you. We've been speaking with Jennifer Hawks Bland, CEO at New York Bio. I'm Ben Comer, and you've just listened to the Business of Biotech. Find us and subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts, and be sure to check out our new weekly video casts of these conversations every Monday under the Business of Biotech tab at Life Science Leader. We'll see you next week, and thanks for listening.